Hello, everyone. My name is Harry Shanmugam, and I'm joining Will Peters today to talk about what exactly a case interview is. We want to talk to you about kind of the case interview process and how to exactly to structure your thoughts and go about successfully navigating a case interview as you prepare for consulting recruiting. So, Will, take it away.
Yeah, so like Harry said, today we're going to be discussing case interviews. So I'm going to take you through my own case interviews one-on-one. So just sort of a roadmap for what we'll be discussing today and just sort of introduction to the case interviews. We want to discuss the different types of cases, the different parts of the interview, and then just go through a pretty generic case structure for how you can expect things to go once you're in the interview. So to start things off, we want to talk about the different types of cases. First of all, we have our interviewer-led case. This is more of your traditional interview style case. Firms like Deloitte, FTI, McKinsey, and others use this type of case. And in this case, the interviewer is going to prompt all of your main questions as well as lead the discussion. It's going to feel like a very normal interview. You're going to be asked a question, you'll formulate a response, and then communicate your response. It's not as discussion-based as some of the other type of case, the interviewee-led, but it definitely is a little more comfortable. But that brings us to our second type of case, which is going to be your interviewee-led case, which firms like LEK, BCG, Bain, and others use. And it is definitely more discussion-based. And as the name suggests, it's all led by the interviewee. After the prompt, an interviewee is going to lead a discussion over a business situation, ask questions, facilitate any kind of discussion and draw any conclusions. And it's going to, like I said, feel like a discussion, which is nice in many respects, but can be a little more challenging. And then finally, the third and probably least common type of case, at least in the realm of consulting, would just be your technical case. Firms like any kind of economic consulting firm or tech consulting firm might do a technical case just to assess your tech capabilities, whether it be in Excel or some kind of statistical software. But like I said, definitely the least common type of case.
There definitely can be some crossover too in terms of the different types of case and categories. So, for example, in an interviewer-led case, it's not to say that you as the interviewer can't be asking any questions, can't have any kind of follow-ups or any back and forth, but just in general, it tends to fall into one of these three types of categories.
Definitely. So moving into the sort of general structure of the interview, it's going to be broken into two parts. Your behavioral questions, which you'll get in any kind of interview, and then your case questions. So the behavioral questions generally come at the beginning, and they're going to take usually about a third of the interview. Like I said, they're your classic interview questions. Particularly in consulting, you're going to want to emphasize any kind of teamwork experiences, any kind of critical thinking experiences, or any other experiences that will answer the questions that you might be asked. And a lot of your answers to these kind of questions you're going to want to have be example-based responses. You're going to want to be able to give stories about your own personal experience in order to answer these questions and to demonstrate experience. Generally, the rule of thumb is to be able to go 3 stories deep on any one question. So if you can have a catalog of just a variety of stories that you can talk about, they'll be versatile cross questions. That's usually your best bet. Now, once you've worked through your behavioral questions through that first third of an interview, you're going to move on to the case. So before we jump into the structure of a case, I think it's helpful to talk about what a case is and why firms even use cases. They're pesky. They're really nerve-wracking. Why would they make us go through this? So what is a case? It's a highly condensed business situation where you're tasked with solving some kind of problem for a client and then communicating your solution and your recommendations for that problem. But more importantly, why do we even mess around? Why would we waste our time with these interviews, with this type of interview? Generally, and I'm afraid my little chat box here might be blocking this. There we go. But generally, these type of cases are going to show that you're able to perform under pressure, you're able to think quickly and think critically, and you can communicate not only your results, but communicate truly what matters in a case. You're going to show your interviewer that you're going to cut through the fluff and get to the main point.
And especially in consulting too, the case interview, I think, serves a pretty important function in that a lot of what you're doing in some of the cases are actual cases that the company or the firm that you're interviewing for has gone through in the past. And so in kind of going through the exercise of engaging with the client and kind of figuring out the problem and laying out the steps and the solutions to move forward, you're essentially kind of practicing what your day-to-day job is going to be like as a consultant. So it's kind of a good testing ground for not only for the company to see how you'd react in that situation that they've gone through before, but also for you to see what a day on the job could look like. Odds are, if you don't like doing case interviews, you're probably not going to love actually working as a consultant.
Definitely, definitely. So as you get into the case, they're generally going to start with, and just to be clear, the cases that we're going to be outlining here are your typical interviewee-led case. And so these interviewee-led cases are often going to start with a general question, or a general introduction to the question, a data dump, which is just going to be giving you as much information as they want to test you with, and then their main question. So just going over a little bit this introduction and the data dump, oftentimes firms will give you a brief outline and then just start throwing numbers at you, at which time you're going to be taking notes, trying to synthesize some information early on, not all of which will even be useful in this interview, but you need to keep track of all of it just in case some of it is. So they just want to see if you can keep track of this. But following your main question, you have time then to offer any clarifying questions for the interviewer. You want to clarify any doubts that you might have, anything that you might not have caught while they were giving you all the data, ask for it then instead of asking for it later. You want to ask your general overarching questions. If you need to, this is generally a good time to talk about general market trends, firm or client history, things of this nature. Ask about what other firms are doing that are competing with your client, these kinds of things. And this is when you're going to be sort of formulating your initial ideas.
And I will say also, make sure when you're leaving this kind of first initial part of the case that you kind of get an understanding of what exactly you're tackling and where exactly the case is going to go. So like make yourself a list of some things that you don't want to leave without when you leave this initial stage. So for me, I would write in the corner of every sheet I had, BGOT, the business model, the geography, the company, the customers, the problem, the objective, as well as kind of the time frame. And I didn't want to leave my initial kind of preliminary understanding of what was going on without having at least a rough understanding of what was going on with those 4 dimensions.
Exactly. Just to echo Harry, you definitely don't want to leave this part of the case not knowing what you're trying to do. That is one of the worst feelings. I don't know if you ever experienced that, Harry, but
Plenty of times.
Speaking from my own experience, if you leave this part of the case and don't really know the question or the situation that you're trying to tackle, the rest of the case is going to be brutal. So make sure you know what you're doing before you leave this part of the case. They're very generous with information in this part of the case. So use that generosity to your favor. So once you've gotten all of the information and the introductory information to your case, it's time for you to lay out your roadmap, or as many call it, your framework. This framework or roadmap is going to outline your approach to how you'd like to solve the case. Generally, you'll take 2 or 3 minutes to sit down and physically write out what you'd like to cover. You would hope that what you decide to cover with respect to the question is going to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive of all possible possibilities of how this question or situation could be tackled. And then once you've laid out your framework, you're going to explain it to your interviewer. Explain how you want to approach the problem in order to find a solution. You want to explain why you want to approach it that way and explain your reasoning for using this approach. And then go ahead and provide some early insights based on the information that you have to support that reasoning. All of this will set you up really well to move through the case. So once you set out your roadmap, you've explained it, and you're now into the meat of the case, where you're really going to be exploring the case and solving this problem through 2 main types of analysis, your qualitative and quantitative analysis. Generally, qualitative analysis is just working through business decisions or business situations and decisions that your client might have to make. This is really going to be testing your critical thinking. You want to be able to explore all possible options to solve any kind of sub-problems to your overall situation. You want to determine, your client's interests and what is actually they're capable of doing in order to approach the situation. And then the other part of this is going to be your quantitative analysis. Oftentimes throughout the course of the case, you'll ask questions or you'll be doing this exploration, and your interviewer will offer you some data or a graph or something like that, and you're going to need to interpret that data or interpret that graph. Oftentimes you'll need to perform quick calculations and then use the final data and the interpreted result as support for like your argument and your ultimate conclusions. They want to see that during this time you can process a lot of qualitative information and then interface that with the quantitative, the numbers that you're given, and in order to make an informed decision.
And I will also say that keep in mind that the framework that you kind of laid out earlier is driving your analysis and your exploration. So if you've laid out kind of 3 domains you want to be tackling, your first step in investigating the problem is to start off with domain 1. And then you can kind of have a conversation with the interviewer, see if there is any data that could be helpful in exploring domain 1. If domain 1's out, okay, that's fine. Move on to domain 2 and on to domain 3 and so on and so forth until you've used your MECE framework to kind of guide you to a place where you have data that you can then analyze to extrapolate conclusions out of.
Exactly. And speaking of conclusions, at some point you will either arrive at the point where you're ready to make a recommendation, or your interviewer will just ask you whether or not you've been able to explore your entire framework or not for a recommendation on this case, how you would solve the problem, what you want to offer as a decision to your client. So generally in your recommendations, you want to summarize the discussion that you've had with your interviewer. Make sure that it's clear, that you know what you've been talking about. Make a clear decision. That means give an exact number, give a yes and no. No maybe, no approximation. You need to give a clear decision and a direct answer to your client. And then use that with some of your strongest evidence that you found in the case to back it up. Maybe you'll recognize where some other possibilities, but ultimately you want to use your evidence to make and to support your decision. And ultimately you want to keep this recommendation brief. Keep it to 90 seconds or less if you can.
Yeah. And a classic case interview trope is, oh, you're walking in the elevator and all of a sudden the CEO appears. You got 60 seconds, go. And you got to be able to quickly and off the top of your head come up with a recommendation.
Exactly.
And also keep in mind that as a consultant, what you're also trying to do is continually sell business to your clients. And so a helpful thing to also do is maybe provide slight qualifications of some of the risks of your analyses and potential next steps for your kind of your company to engage with your client in the future. That shows that you're someone who understands how the business works and how fundamentally at the end of the day, this is about a relationship with their clients and not just an isolated problem.
Definitely. So once you've made your recommendations, the interview usually wraps up. You can ask any follow-up questions after the case. Ask about this case, if the firm actually had it, these kind of things, and then the interview will conclude. But just a couple tips and tricks that I have for making sure that you have a strong case and a strong case interview. First of all, I think a really well done framework or roadmap and really to the point and strong recommendations is going to give you your best possible case. Time and time again in interviews, when I got feedback after interviews about what I did well, it was that my framework was clear and my recommendations were strong. And that's, I believe, what helped me move through this interview process. And additionally, if you can provide really quick and correct math, as well as clear communication of what you see happening throughout the case, that's just going to support you along the way. Sort of in between those two bookends of your framework and your recommendation, I think those two things can really, build the strength of your interview. Then finally, don't be afraid to take a second, ask for a minute even, and really think through things. Show that you're a logical thinker, that you're willing to process things and piece things together instead of just throwing things out like popcorn. You want to show that you're able to actually structure what you're thinking and your approach to how to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. Consulting is very much an iterative process, and they're not looking so much for the right answer. They already know what the answer is. They're more so interested in seeing how exactly you think about a problem, what unique insights and unique kind of modalities of thinking that you can bring to the case team. And that's kind of the value that you're going to be adding. So again, the interview is not so much like a performance so much as it is an exploration of kind of your skills and the way that you go about thinking and solving problems.
Yeah. And like Harry was saying, there isn't necessarily a right answer. They just want to see how you think about things and how you approach things. So the best you can do to communicate that and demonstrate that, the better. So I think that wraps up our presentation here. Thank you for your attention, and we hope this was as useful as for you as it was for us.